Do moral laws exist? That's going to be the question for this lesson, and to answer that, we are going to have to define moral absolutism and moral relativism, and then evaluate these two types of ethical theory. Let's start by looking at a dilemma. This is the Lifeboat Case that's covered in Michael Sandel's excellent book, Justice. There are 4 sailors, and they are cast away on the high seas, 1,600 miles away from the Cape of Good Hope. They've spent days at sea, and they have run out of food and water. They have absolutely nothing to eat, and they've started to become delirious. One of the sailors is a young boy, and against all advice, he has drunk some seawater and is now dangerously close to death. After they've been drifting for 7 days without food and 5 without water, 18 days in total they've been shipwrecked for, the sailors begin to speak about what should be done in the likely event that no help is going to come. They discuss the families that they have to support, and they look at the young boy who is not well. They decide that in order to save their lives, it might be necessary to kill him and feast upon his remains. There are 3 adult sailors. One of them refuses to countenance this notion, won't have it, wants no part in the murder of the boy as he sees it. The other 2 believe that the extreme situation would justify the killing of their innocent crewmate. Upon further reflection, they decide to kill him, and even the man who initially didn't want any part in the killing is happy to have part in the eating. They kill and eat the boy and live off his remains for 4 days, and then they are saved. They are brought back home to England, whereupon they're put on trial, and they become part of one of the most famous court cases of their age. The jury and the judge had to decide, were they murderers? Had they broken an absolute moral law that could never be broken? Or did the context of their situation, the extreme necessity, the killing of 1 life to save 3 others, did that justify their actions? What do you think? Now, if you are absolutely scandalised by this and you think that killing an innocent person is always wrong, end of, full stop, no caveats, then potentially you're a moral absolutist. Moral absolutists are very common, and many of them are religious. The 10 Commandments are a perfect example of a list of moral absolutes. The 10 Commandments are believed to apply in all places, at all time, for all time. The 10 Commandments were true in 1950 and in 1350 and in 1050, and they will be true in 50 years' time from now. They apply in all places at all times. They are absolutely true. It's not just religions that subscribe to the belief in moral absolutism. Our modern day preoccupation with human rights is similarly built on the same ground. You can't say that human rights apply in all places at all times without believing that they are moral absolutes. So moral absolutism is a common belief. It's defined on the screen in front of you, so it's worth pausing the video now to read it. There are, however, significant problems with moral absolutism, and these become clear when we look at the way other people live their lives. This isn't just a modern issue. We can look at the story of Darius, the Callatians, and the Greeks to illustrate this. And in doing so, we go right back to the father of history, Herodotus. Darius was a king of ancient Persia, and because his empire stretched over such a wide expanse, he was well aware that some people within his kingdom had totally different views to others. To illustrate this point, he brought the Greeks and Callatians together and asked them to discuss how they disposed of the remains of their fathers, which is a fairly dark topic to talk about. The Callatians, in order to show respect, ate the remains of their fathers. The Greeks burnt their fathers on a funeral pyre. They cremated their remains. And both were absolutely scandalised at the actions of the others. The Greeks thought eating the remains was a disgusting abomination, and likewise the Callatians thought setting fire to their dead fathers was similarly morally outrageous and repugnant. And neither side could be induced by any sort of monetary reward to consider even the other's point of view. They simply could not countenance eating their dead fathers or setting them on fire. Both thought that what the other was doing was morally wrong. But the fact that they disagreed seemed to suggest that different cultures in different places at different times have different values, and seem to think that morals themselves, morality itself, is flexible. This is the view of moral relativism, which again is described on the screen. This issue plays out in our own world. For instance, France banned the burqa a few years ago. But as this cartoon illustrates, were they right to do that? This issue highlights a real weakness in moral absolutism. You are at risk of becoming very judgmental, of believing that your view is the right view and it should apply to everyone always. And that seems unduly arrogant in our world, our global world. However, there are real weaknesses to not believing in moral absolutes and being a moral relativist. Let's consider this incredibly difficult issue, child brides in Afghanistan. As you can see from the image, a much older man is being married to a girl who's not yet reached puberty. This occurs in rural parts of Afghanistan and is seen as entirely acceptable. The older gentleman brings the young girl up. He's a surrogate father figure, but with conjugal rights. And the idea is that he's going to, because he plays a role in bringing her up, he's going to shape her into being the perfect wife. Looking at this from a Western perspective, it is nothing short of appalling. It's child abuse, and it should be stopped. As a moral relativist, though, you have no right to make that claim, and this activity is not immoral. It's culturally relative and therefore acceptable. Moral relativists would struggle to condemn this. In fact, they wouldn't want to. A moral absolutist would. There are problems associated with both positions. Let's look at these positions then on a spectrum that spans from absolutism to relativism. Examples include the Ten Commandments and human rights, and absolutism's great because it gives stability to your moral world. Things are just right and they are wrong, and that will always be the case. And so your moral world is structured and consistent, and that seems fair and right and just. However, it is hugely judgmental of other cultures and views and can be very narrow-minded. Also, it seems to ignore the fact that different people, even at the same time, but certainly when separated by centuries, have come to completely different views, and all of them have claimed moral absolutism. The Callatians and the Greeks could not agree, but they were both moral absolutists. The fact that there are competing views presents a real challenge to moral absolutism and really questions any basis that it has for legitimacy. Moral relativism claims that there aren't any moral laws, and the advantage of this is it's entirely judgmental. It doesn't say that morality doesn't exist, but there are no moral laws that apply in all places at all times. Rather, they're culturally dependent, and they are invented and made appropriate by each society. So the rules we have now are different to the rules we had 100 years ago, and that's fine, because all morals are relative. The problem with this is when it's taken to its logical extreme, you can allow any action by it. In rural Afghanistan, it is moral for a 30-year-old man to marry an 8-year-old girl, and yet that seems to violate a fundamental moral rule. We're just so uncomfortable with that. Therefore, these two positions both seem to lead to intractable problems. If you're an absolutist, you seem to be ignoring the variety in the world and you're very close-minded. If you're a relativist, are you just going to allow anything to happen? The question that you've got to answer is, where do you fit? Which system is the best? Can either be fully successful? Is it possible to mix the two systems? It's up to you. The reason we're looking at this, though, is because when we look at utilitarianism and situation ethics, we will be able to judge how they try and answer the problem of absolute moral values or relative moral values. And the evaluation that we've gone through here, and that's coming up in the next two slides, that will allow us to have an extra level of depth in our analysis of those two theories and our evaluation of those two theories. Coming up are two slides that have a lot of text on them. I'd like you to pause this video and read those two slides and add them to your notes. So coming up now is an evaluation of relativism. I'm going to move it on to look at an evaluation of absolutism. So, do moral laws exist? It's up to you.